Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
All right. I'd like to introduce our next speaker and panel. I'd like to introduce Dr. Kathy Olson, who's going to be leading our executive panel. Kathy is the Deputy Director of the National Science Foundation. She joined the National Science Foundation from the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the Executive Office of the President, where she was the Associate Director and Deputy Director for Science and responsible for overseeing science and education policy, including the physical sciences, life sciences, environmental science, behavioral, and social sciences. Dr. Olson is going to be starting our discussion by talking about the importance of diverse thought in IT and to the National Science Foundation and to our nation. Kathy?
Well, actually, I'm going to ask the panelists if they would come up on the stage right now. And I want to thank Lucy and Janice Cooney from NSF for inviting me, Lucy Sanders, and Bill Wolf for hosting this event. And as my panel gets up here, I'm just going to say is I'm actually asked the panel members to only speak for three minutes, basically putting the issues on the table. And at 5 minutes, I will walk over and escort them back to their chair. So it's going to happen. Of course, I know all of them, and so I know most of them, so I think that will be, they know me. And they know that I will do that. Because one of the points is really for you to hear what you want to know from the panelists. So we're going to put the issues on the table, and then I will open it up for discussion, and I hope to have at least 30 minutes of discussion in terms of asking your questions, and then we can discuss among the panel members, because each of the agencies has really a different approach. The purpose of the meeting today, as you know, is to discuss diversity, innovation, and the U.S. competitiveness, as well as the role of women and minorities can and must play in IT. And the previous speaker really sort of set the stage in terms of why diverse groups are important in terms of technology and competitiveness. The panelists today are to discuss the importance of IT to the nation and the important role of the diverse workforce. They're also going to discuss the approaches that they're taking within their agencies, our, in Sharon's case, within all of our agencies in the perspective of the White House, to significantly look at IT competitiveness and the participation of diverse groups in professional IT. You are all very familiar with the obstacles. Women make up less than 25% of the science and engineering workforce in 2000. The proportion of women in IT computer science workforce has been decreasing and is now 30%. New jobs will increase at more than twice the rate of the total new jobs between 2004 and 2014 in IT. That's 30% versus 13%, accounting for 1 in 19 new openings and adding 1 million new workers. And the one-page handout, and I think I left it down there, is just great to have in terms of data. More than half of the new S&E jobs will be IT. But what's interesting, if you look at the NSF indicators, there are many jobs that are not classified as science and engineering jobs. Also requires to have a background in science, math, engineering, and in IT. The other thing that is very aware is that in all sciences, okay, IT is playing a critically major role. The National Science Foundation has now started an Office of Cyber Infrastructure that reports to the director, to Arden Brabant, and to myself. And the reason is that from social and behavioral sciences to biological sciences, it's not just the geoscience and physical science now, really needs IT. So the importance of this area for our economy and our future and our science is just critical. Computer science is the only STEM field to have lost undergraduate women since the 1980s. And again, that's the list. Lucy Sanders knows I showed a slide, and it basically showed the increases that we're making in all fields. But computer science was not on that for two reasons. One, I'm an optimist, and two, it is the one that has the degrees. And if we look at minorities receiving, only 3 to 4% of the undergraduates' computer science degrees are in minorities. But the federal government does play a major role in developing programs and activities to enhance innovation and competitiveness. On Monday, I co-hosted with the Secretary of Education the first national summit on the advancement of girls in math and science, and some of you participated in that as well. Two things really came clear. The important role of mentoring. That is critical. And indeed, the President actually has an award that recognizes that NSF actually runs for the Office of Science and Technology Policy that emphasizes the role of mentors, because that, in terms of science and in terms of IT, has shown to be critically important. The other thing which is important from K through 12 education to undergraduate, graduate, and postdoc is the real integration of research and education to get young kids already involved. And I use this as an example because when I was in Pittsburgh, I told the story. I had a young girl stay at my house. Her mother was visiting her daughter at Georgetown, and she wanted to sleep in because she was a teenager. And I asked her what courses that she was taking. And she was very excited about science, and she was third grade, and she's now 13. She's in 8th grade going into 9th grade. And I said, she asked about computer science. She says, oh, my God, I go to sleep. 0110-00110. And I think that that is an issue in terms of getting people young age excited about computer science, which is critical for our future. I just want to point out that at the National Science Foundation, we actually have 2 programs in computer science focused on these issues. We have the IT workforce, which funds research into the cause and remediation of underrepresentation in IT. And we also have the size, broadening participation in computing. And Janice Cooney is here, and she is responsible for that program at NSF. And it's to implement projects, including broad alliances, to address underrepresentation. And in fact, this is support of this alliance, which brings the attention. One of the things I'd like to point out is, although both programs are focused at underrepresentation in IT, it's expected that the resulting types of interventions, like mentoring, like the integration of research and education, curriculum reform, will improve research and education opportunities to all students in computing. So on that note, I'd like to set the stage and get up and get down very briefly as well, and turn it over to Sharon Hayes. Oh, I need to introduce them, don't I? And Sharon Hayes is the Chief of Staff at the Office of Science and Technology Policy and serves as the OSTP's Deputy Director for Homeland and National Security Issues. Prior to this job, she was Staff Director of the Subcommittee on Research on the House Committee on Science, but she also served as Deputy Director of the technology aspect of OSTP before becoming Chief of Staff. And under her responsibility was all of IT. So on that note, Sharon?
Thank you, Kathy. And I will keep this brief. OSTP's role is really one of coordination of agency activities. So there are a number of agency representatives sitting on the panel today. I'm going to let them talk about their programs, their views, obviously, and really, as we open up the discussion, I'll emphasize that coordination role a little bit more. Let me just make 2 points to open this up. We were asked to consider a couple of different questions, and one of those questions was the importance of IT in today's society. And I really think that it's difficult to understate the importance of IT in today's society. It has a fundamental role in our nation's security, and Bill Berry from the Department of Defense can certainly speak to that. But not just our national security, our homeland security. So much of our infrastructure, including our critical infrastructure, depends on IT systems and networks. So we have a fundamental dependence on IT at the very core of our nation's security. I think we all know its importance in commerce. It has a critical role, not just because of the internet, but because of the way companies do business nowadays requires IT. And as Kathy mentioned, it has a really important role in furthering other scientific disciplines, something that's important to us at OSTP. Let me come back to the competitiveness issue, the importance of IT in commerce. This is something that OSTP has worked a lot on in the last couple of years. And in fact, in the President's State of the Union speech this last January, he introduced something called the American Competitiveness Initiative. That initiative has a couple of different prongs to it, 2 prongs really. One is on increasing or enhancing our competitiveness by making sure that we fund fundamental research, in particular in the physical sciences, engineering, information technology, computational sciences, et cetera. And that's because we recognize that with all the pressures on the federal budget these days, that was an area that wasn't receiving as much attention as it needs to because those areas are so fundamental to our nation's long-term competitiveness. Not that they're not important to security, other missions, et cetera, but there is a fundamental need there. The second part of the American Competitiveness Initiative, or ACI, stresses science and math education and the importance of improving that at the K-12 level, as well as at higher levels. It makes some mention of graduate and postgraduate needs as well. So we actually put together, after or was released subsequent to the State of the Union address, this booklet which describes the American competitiveness in more detail, and you can find that on the website. I didn't bring extra copies, but it's certainly a good read. Another question that we were asked to address is the importance of diversity in the IT workforce. And again, I won't call it a false question, but it's so difficult to understate this as well that I'm sure all the other panelists are going to echo this. And let me point to another recent report on competitiveness that I think has an important role in shaping how we should view diversity in the workforce. And that is, and Bill Wolf sitting in the front row will appreciate this advertisement, but this recent report on Rising Above the Gathering Storm, which was released last fall, and was really an important report in terms of really coalescing a number of ideas about the importance of research, K-12 education in math science, graduate education in math science, to competitiveness and really our nation's future. We know that we have lots of competitors around the rest of the world, and that countries like China and India are making amazing investments in research, in their research infrastructure. They have large populations of well-educated, talented people to throw at important research problems. And they are our competitors and will be increasingly so in the next decades. I mention that because what this says to me is that we can't go into this fight, and I don't mean to put it in too much of an adversarial context, but we can't go into this fight to maintain our nation's competitiveness if we're, in point of fact, fighting with one hand tied behind our back. And I fear that that's exactly what we do when we don't develop diversity in the workforce, when we don't turn to that more than 50% of our population that are women, that are minorities, that are individuals with disabilities and so forth. So this is a critical issue, not just to women and our place in society, but to our nation's future. I think what I'll do is turn it back over to Kathy, and she can introduce the next speaker. Like I said, they represent the agencies. These are the people that OSTP works with, and so I look forward to a good dialogue. Thank you.
in terms of discussion, when we open up the discussion, I will be representing the NSF as well as moderator. The order that we are going to have the speakers is going to be NIST, NASA, Defense, and then Education. And so I'm just letting you know. So the next speaker is Sita Falani.
Yes.
And she's the Director of Interagency Affairs at the U.S. Department of Education. She's the Director... No, I'm just like going this way. You're NIST. I'm like reading this going, excuse me, support staff at NSF. She's the Director of the IT Laboratory at NIST, where she oversees a research program designed to support U.S. industry, government, academia with measurements and standards underpinning our IT innovations. And NIST is also a major player within the American Competitiveness Initiative.
Yes,
she served as the Chief Information Officer at NIST.
Yes, and if it's okay, I'll just stay here.
Okay.
So I'll save a few minutes of walk time. I do want to emphasize that is one of the core mission of NIST is measurement and standards and technologies advancing in the ways that will enhance economic security and improve our quality of life. So we have a very different mission than perhaps some of the other agencies that are trying to defend our country, develop our energy, etc. But our niche is measurement and standards, and we have the scientists and the research that support that. And as has been said by almost every speaker, IT is a critical underpinning of that, and the research that has to be done in IT to fully enable the sciences as they proceed through this mix of combining such things as nano, bio, and now IT into the new world that we're all moving into, and trying to get a handle on exactly where the measurement and standards needs are in that explosion. And so one of the things we try to do is work very closely with our universities. We consider ourselves their customers, but we also bring the professors in, we bring postdocs in, we bring all kinds of interns that was mentioned earlier. We have a big intern program. And what we're trying to do in some sense is educate the universities as to what our unique needs are for the scientists and IT and computer science. There's a slight difference in whether you're designing a weapon or whether you're designing the standards that might permit a better IT security and biometrics underpinnings for the identity of individuals in the country. One thing we have learned at NIST, because of the diverse science and research backgrounds, is that diversity is broader than just what I think has been talked about today. We really do need the backgrounds, the experience in other fields, not necessarily just in computer science. We need the physicists, the chemists, but all of those interacting with the computer science field is where the action really is in the world that we're trying to nail down sufficiently to be able to enable the economy to grow and build on the standards and the underpinnings of measurements that are needed. We reach out to many of the minority institutions. We also work closely with the majority institutions that have these special programs, and we encourage more of that. We really are also struggling with ways to retain the recruits that we do have. The Motorola experience is certainly reflected at NIST, and it is something that we work hard at, and we do have variety of councils and mechanisms. So being here today and getting new ideas on how to develop the pool. I think one example that I've used is the sense of an ATM. You can walk up to an ATM and try to withdraw money, but you're not going to do very well unless you've deposited money. So trying to really look at that development cycle and encourage the people to be there when you need the employees is really where I think a lot of the focus needs to be.
Great. Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Tony Dawsey, and she's the Assistant Administrator for Human Capital Management and Chief Human Capital Officer at NASA. In her job, she's responsible for setting NASA's workforce development strategy, aligning NASA's human resource policies and programs with organizational mission, strategic goals, performance outcomes, and identifying best practices and benchmarking studies. Tony.
Good afternoon. NASA has contributed not only in science and engineering throughout the world. It has also contributed to science, medicine, agriculture. It has improved the quality of life in many ways throughout the world. Having said that, IT is an integral part of virtually every program and project we have at NASA. The availability of reliable and responsive IT systems is a fundamental requirement to the success of the day-to-day operations of our agency. And they are the method of choice for storing and retrieving scientific, engineering, research, and management information. The inherent dependence on IT, of course, drives the dependence on a highly skilled IT workforce. And we do everything that we can to attract and retain the best and the brightest in engineering and science. We have but one of our efforts is a rigorous cooperative education program, corporate recruitment program. And what this means is that we have targeted schools and diverse organizations and professional organizations, and we've expanded our outreach and capacity building relationships with these groups and institutions, and we've expanded our recruitment venues. We visit historically black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, and professional diverse organizations such as the American Indian Society for Engineers and Scientists. The other part of our program is our education program. We work very closely with schools K through 12 and undergrad and graduate level colleges and universities. We put in a lot of time, a lot of resources and money, and I guess money is a resource, but we in schools that offer STEM disciplines. We also support the educators in those schools because we realize they're the people who are inspiring and motivating and nurturing the students, and they serve as mentors and role models. So we spend resources on our educators. NASA gives about 1,200 competitive internships, fellowships, and research opportunities to colleges and universities for students and faculties in the STEM disciplines. We also give 500 competitive scholarships, internships, and research opportunities to underrepresented and underserved schools and universities. And we give about 100 grants to enhance the capability of underserved and underrepresented colleges and universities to enable them to compete and conduct basic or applied NASA-related research. We also engage Americans in NASA's mission. We digitize and megatag up to 10% of NASA's approved learning materials to be delivered using technology-enabled learning systems through e-education. The other effort we have made is we've gone forward for new legislation to provide us with enhanced flexibilities for hiring and retaining our workforce, and that legislation was passed and is now known as the NASA Flexibility Act of 2004. It has given us opportunities in terms of retaining our own staff, attracting staff from other agencies, and recruiting not only from colleges and universities, but from the private sector as well. I can go into more detail on that, but in the interest of time, I'll just keep moving. NASA's demographics are, we're proud of them. 72% of our IT community, and let me back up a little bit. We have two sets of figures. If you look at our IT community, the group that reports directly to our CIO, we have 291 of them. 72% of them are women and minorities. Women make up 47% of that figure. If you look at the larger NASA population, there are positions that have, not as a critical competency, but as a component, an important component of their jobs, IT. There are about 1,676 of those people, and about 50% of that group are women and minorities. Women make up about 31% of that group. The way we look at how all of our flexibilities and our efforts in recruitment and education are playing out is we have, well, and we can't take credit for this, OMB mandated that.
And thank you, OMB.
And thank you. OMB mandated that federal agencies come up with a human capital plan, strategic plan for their IT workforce. Actually, we have that more than just for IT at NASA, but we do have one for IT, and it was developed with the joint work of the CIOs, the CIO Council, and the CHICO, the Chief Human Capital Officer Council. The CIO Council came up with 3 specific areas that we needed to focus on, and that is IT project management, IT architecture, and IT security. At NASA, we added 2 others, and that is IT capital planning and investment and IT solutions architecture. In addition to complying with the human capital plan, we also are one of the green agencies in human capital for the President's management agenda. And as you all may or may not know, we have pretty high targets in reaching green and staying green.
Okay, just finish up.
Oh, sorry.
I said I would do that, so.
No, I appreciate it. It went fast.
Yes, it does.
We also abide by the Klinger-Cohen Act, which requires us to do annual workforce assessments, and Section 209 of the E-Government Act, which is also very concerned with our information technology and information resources management.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker, who's going to have some overheads, is Dr. William Berry, Dr. Bill Berry. He's the Acting Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Labs and Basic Science, the Office of the Director of Defense Research and Engineering in the Department of Defense. In this job, he provides leadership and coordinates the basic research programs of the military services and defense agencies. And he is responsible for STEM education workforce issues. Has been working on this for many years, co-chaired the NSTC subcommittee on education and workforce, and he's also responsible for policy. Bill.
Thank you. Since I've been adequately threatened by the women next to me, I'm not going to use those view graphs. Okay. I'm just going to sit here and ad-lib. No. Obviously, information technology is a big component of everything we do in the Defense Department, from design and acquisition of weapon systems and the deployment of our soldiers, troops, and material that we need to do, to the very fundamental research that's required to provide those capabilities for the nation, for our national defense. I just want to highlight IT, though, within the context of the bigger issue of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Of the federal workforce, actually, to show you how important this is in the Department of Defense, math and computer science area, 45% of those employed in the federal government work for the Department of Defense. And electrical engineering and computer engineering, 79% of the employees with those backgrounds work for the Department of Defense. So is IT important to us? I think those numbers say it very well. I would like to be able to say that we have done a good job in attracting the diverse kind of workforce we need. Actually, the figures that I have don't really demonstrate that. If you look at the number of total civilians in the Department of Defense, 662,000. Science and engineers are 94,000 of those. IT, 78,000 of that workforce are IT workers in some capacity, not necessarily doing research, which is the end of the spectrum where my responsibilities lie. 1/5 of DOD scientists and engineers are female, and 1/5 of DOD scientists and engineers are non-white. If you look at just IT, it gets a little better. 1/4 of DoD IT workers are female, and 1/4 of DoD IT workers are non-white. I just want to make a point that that's not good enough by any of our standards when you realize, as Sharon mentioned, that we're really talking about here what we need to do to capture, I think, what Shirley Jackson has said so eloquently in her little manuscript a few years ago called The Gathering Storm, which was the impetus for the study that Bill's folks did, the caveat to that, what do we do to lift ourselves above the gathering storm, if you will, and this resulted, as Sharon said, in the American Competitiveness Initiative. But the issue is that we're really talking about the underrepresented majority in the nation that we really need to attract to science and engineering in general and IT in particular. So I think we all have our work cut out. I don't think any of us know how to do that well. I mean, we obviously are not in the position to set quotas and so forth in order to get the job done. So we have to be creative in doing other things in order to do that. We have a particular problem in the Department of Defense in that the majority of folks we want to hire have to be able to get a security clearance. That means they have to be U.S. citizens for the most part, and that also means not only do they have to have a good academic record, but they also have a clean record in general, which puts another standard on there that some folks don't need to worry about and deal with. We in the national security arena certainly do. We have, over the last couple years, developed a new program called the National Defense Education Program with a lot of help from a lot of folks. Academies of Engineering here has been instrumental in helping us pull that together and think about how to do it. But it is a program that I think meets some of the needs that was mentioned by the young woman back here, and that is the issue of not just sending kids to school, but this program actually is a program that will allow us to give scholarships for undergraduate work, fellowships for graduate work, internships in our laboratories in the summertime as part of a continuum program, and they're required to come work for us when they're done. So it is a continuum program that brings them in from day one as a government employee, sends them to school, has them come work for us in the summer, and we got them when they're done, which is the important piece to us because we're competing with our friends in industry and academia for this valuable commodity, and IT is particularly difficult. So maybe I'll just stop there and turn it over to you and Tony.
Right. And I was going to say, if we're going to have the workers, IT workers, the IT scientists and engineers, then we're going to have to start at K1 to develop them. And Tony Flower is the Director of Interagency Affairs at the U.S. Department of Education. He provides the outreach to the math and science education community on the President's Competitiveness Initiative, and he also provides the leadership for the Federal Interagency Committee on Education, which Bill did chair and now is being chaired by Tony. So Bill was very happy when you came. Tony.
Good afternoon. I am here from the Department of Education. We're more of a resource, I think, for this audience than we would be a competitor for IT professionals. We really don't have a lot of IT professionals in education. And the first thing that I will say about No Child Left Behind is that, by all appearances, the law is working, and that accountability and high standards are making a change in school districts across the country. The data is coming back. When I started at the Department of Education almost 20 years ago, I was working under the Reagan administration under a guy named Chester Finn. And one of the things that we were trying to do at that time was to try to provide data to the general public about what was going on. And we were working on this item called the wall chart. And the wall chart was simply a list of the 50 states and a provision of general basic data about education in those states. It was one of the most difficult things to do simply because no state in the nation wanted to be compared against the other states. We're not talking about cities, we're not talking about communities, we were talking about state by state. Today, because of No Child Left Behind and some other changes that have happened in education law, we have disaggregated data on schools within school districts. It's an amazing change. And that information is important to audiences like yourselves because it provides you all with data to make the case that you need to make. I've been working with the math science community for about 7 or 8 years now in various capacities. One thing that I would say to the IT education community particularly is you really need to sharpen your elbows, because there is a lot of competition for attention amongst the math and science and IT education communities. And one of the things that I see over and over again is that IT is left off of the table in 90% of the conversations that I have at the Department of Education or at the in any other conversation outside of IT meetings. So that is that's something a hurdle that I think you guys are going to have to work on in terms of getting the attention. Obviously, what we've heard today, IT is important to all things. In my capacity as the interagency, the director of interagency affairs, I can sort of echo what Tony and Bill said, and that's that agencies are really making changes to be competitive in math and science and in IT. They're really going out of the way to identify possible employees and to work with them, to bring them into the agencies, not just these two agencies, but NIH, the Department of Energy, the Department of Agriculture. They understand that a lot of their highly technical employees are going to be retiring, and they're just like industry. They're looking for ways to fill those gaps. One of the things that I would suggest, if you're looking at, and just in general about education, the Department of Defense does incredible work with educating youth, both in the services and at the on the civilian side, because they run their own school system. And they have a huge influence in the communities where they are, where they're placed around the country. And one of the things that I know that really works well is that in those communities where there's a huge military presence, the families, the military personnel are required by their supervisors to be at the school when they're supposed to be at the school for school conferences, to meet with teachers, and those kinds of things. That has an enormous impact on the way that the school system operates, because when you see parents, you respond to parents at the school level. So, one thing that I've always said is, private industry should look into that as well, to, get parents on the ground in the schools. The last thing I'll say about research, I was in charge of doing research on the Women's Science Summit that we had on Monday, and frankly, there's not a lot of research that's out there on diversity in education. There was a lot of it in the 80s and probably up until about 1995, and I was looking at wonderful data, but it was 15, 16, 20 years old, and I couldn't use it essentially to put together the briefing papers for this particular summit. So there's an incredible need for research in this area on how to teach, how to learn IT, mathematics, science. One of the most true things I've ever heard anybody say in Washington, Secretary Page, the previous Secretary of Education, got up in front of a group like this and said, "We don't know how to teach math and science. We don't know how to teach math and science." On Monday, we're naming a mathematics panel. In 2 or 3 years, we're going to have a report from them. We may get some direction from them. We may find out that there's not enough data out there. But we really need to get more work done on teaching and learning in the technical fields, or we're not going to improve education. So thanks.
Thank you very much. And I should say that the National Science Foundation actually has programs addressing that in terms of how do we learn math and science, working with the Child Health Institute at NIH. I also want to point out that the National Science Foundation is responsible for oversight of a committee on equal opportunities in science and engineering, and they have just finished publishing a report on broadening participation in American science and engineering, looking back the last 10 years, but also talking at a number of our programs to enhance broadening participation in all science, math, engineering, and IT. On that note, and I want to thank my panel. You guys were perfect, so I appreciate that. I would like to open it up for questions. Please keep your questions very short to allow time for my panel to make the points that I would not allow them to make because I only limited their introductory remarks for 3 to 5 minutes. Yes.
I'm Richard Tapia from Rice University. I have some comments that I wrote down while they were, people were talking, and I'll try to go as fast as I can, okay? Please be aware, okay, please be aware that of our changing demographics. California and Texas are over 50% black and brown, Hispanic, African American, okay? That means underrepresentation, not diversity, okay? How do we deal with these issues? We have to recalibrate. We have to check how we do things, okay? This is a different population. How do we evaluate? How do we sell? Do we know what we mean by the best and the brightest? Do we continue to value what we measure because we don't know how to measure what we value? Okay? A whole different world, okay? The panels that we see, are they diverse? Do they include underrepresentation? As we, supply, it's a demand. It really is a demand. It's not a supply problem. We've learned that. Dean Kamen learned that with his project in FIRST. We don't sell to our youth. We don't sell to our women. It's clearly demand. As we go to K-12 and someone from Motorola or somebody says, look, my job is cool. The kids say, I don't believe you. Okay? You don't look like me. You have different value systems. I don't relate to you. When I see someone that I can trust and say, yeah, you're having fun, same value system, then I'm going to go for it. They see through it. All these people coming talking about these wonderful jobs. Then why do we just concentrate on fixing them so they accept our value system? We have to fix us. We have to make it more attractive so they can fit in that environment. They may see the environment and then say, that's certainly nothing that I want to get into. My students at the graduate level say, if this is what academia is about, my underrepresented minority students and women, I don't want it. We're not going to continue to fix these students. We have to fix what we're selling them. Finally, at Rice, bioengineering, with its medical applications, is having huge success. Women, minorities, diversifying faculty, and graduate education. You can comment on that. Thank you.
Yes. Actually, I would say that Richard Tapia was responsible for a science and technology center that was supported by NSF, where they really had a very strong education program which got the kids excited, and he is held in very high regards there. Comments? Wait, we just say yes.
I have to agree. The kind of mentors you need and the kind of models you need are those that students you're trying to attract need to relate to.
Yeah, I think another thing is, and this is true, I think, of the sciences, technological fields, mathematics, et cetera, is that I think we do a disservice when we give kids the impression that you only go into or you study one of those fields because you want to be a scientist. Yes. And there's at least a couple of people sitting at this table who have advanced scientific degrees, who went through that entire program but didn't choose that career, and I think we're all pretty happy in it. And so there are role models beyond just the scientists saying, come be a scientist, come be like me. I think there's a lot of people in other fields that got that scientific training if we do that, it's just an additional hook to get more people, more kids into those fields.
As an IT DA, and I have participated in a number of town halls like this, and one thing strikes me is that, when you talk about decision makers, you don't really have this underrepresented population represented around the table. So the question is, how do you bring those talent people to the table where the decisions are made? And one more thing is that NSF puts out great reports. The question is, what do you do with the reports when you have like 10, 20 pages of recommendations where there are no follow-ups? In other words, there's no specific steps to take to the next step. It's a little bit of criticism on that part, but I love these reports. I actually read them, and I'm one of those people who read NSF reports and email the director and say, well, I think you should think about this way. But, I don't really see the whole lot of gap filled. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I'll comment on one thing. First of all, 95% of NSF money goes out the door, okay? So we provide the money based on the bottoms-up ideas, and NSF develops their programs based on what we hear the needs are in terms of the community. The reports, what we do is in terms of all of our education programs now have assessments. And so we're looking at them to see what works and what doesn't work, and then hopefully provide more money to areas that what works and actually sunset or end the programs that are not effective. But I'm glad that you read them as well as I do. And I hope more than just on planes. Does anyone else want to add?
I would just say that it's very difficult to affect change from Washington out to the country. And what I see is that change occurs on the state and local level, and we can track that and point to activities that are going on out across the country and try to identify first whether the change that's affected is a positive change. And if it is, then we can take that information and disseminate it. I have a report here from the Texas Business and Education Coalition that they got together, a bunch of businesses in Texas got together with academia and the public schools, and they are all working together in order to affect change within Texas and to stoke the pipeline for engineers and technicians through the whole public school and the state university system, so that all of the IT or companies in Texas, and there are many of them, are working together in order to make sure that that pipeline flows. And that is a perfect example to me of grassroots work really being done in order to make the kinds of changes that are necessary.
I'm Deborah Rollison. I run a research section at the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory. But because this is an issue on diversity, I'm actually here on leave. But let me... So let me speak a little bit from my perspective and success in encouraging youth into science and engineering. It takes a village to train a STEM professional. And this is where I think we have some institutional infrastructural difficulties, even within the DoD. You need to get these bright, talented, creative, exploratory young in the lab, doing science in a contributory, contextualized sense, because they are part of the team. And as someone who's had high school students and undergraduates be first authors on science and nature papers, it works. However, as proud as our laboratory and national labs and other places are of bringing these young people into our programs, there's very little, shall we say, back benefit or reward other than for encouraging these young people into science. So you might have 1 year of bringing in undergraduates from minority-serving institutions. Year 2, you pay for it. And there are no real rewards other than what you see these young people imbibing. Because as much as the lab loves to tout it, you're not getting anything back from the reward system, including salary or time. So until we change that, it's very hard to incentivize the people who can create the IT and STEM professionals of the future.
Thank you. I think almost all of the federal agencies, DOE's not here, but NIH, NSF, actually has programs to bring undergraduates, high school students, teachers into laboratories, into the laboratories, because it's so critical, again, the integration of research and education, and your statement is noted. NIST.
I'd like to mention, too, that there are other resources that we sometimes overlook. We have technicians and secretaries and clerks within our home organizations. Frequently, they get excited because they actually see what scientists, and computer science in particular, but all scientists do and create, and they need support because they are willing to go back to school. We can do that. We fund their schooling. We sometimes have some of our very best scientists coming up through that pool, and yet that's frequently overlooked.
Great.
Thank you. My name is Germán Núñez, and I'm Vice President and Professor at a university, at a state university. Since I'm not talking about specifically my field, I have to take the fifth on the university in itself. I'm going to draw on the analogy that was made pertaining to the ATM and the deposits and the withdrawals, and probably touch on the fact that we're overdrafting in many ways. Also in that we do not know how to teach mathematics and science at the basic level. I think that we're very good at identifying the problem of supply versus demand at the end of the pipeline in the colleges, and it becomes even more acute when you look at advanced degrees and what we require from them. We're importing the majority or a significant number of the individuals at those levels, and our colleague from the Department of Defense pointed out how that plays into the fact that the individuals that they need required to have clearance and so on and so forth. You need to have nationals to do that. One thing that I haven't heard, and this is a very personal opinion after over almost 30 years in academia, is we have numbers of people that are graduating. I really question whether they have the skills when they graduate and walk with a college degree, particularly in science and engineering, whether they have the skills represented by that degree. And I have heard a number of people speak, and I think I was one of the... Since
you're my friend, I can say this. Get to your question.
Get to my question. Well, it's good. Since you're my friend, I'm going to go slow at it. I think I need to take my time. I think that the fact is that we have to look at the basic STEM teachers. Unless we know how to teach, we will not be able to produce them. And with regards to the teachers, our colleague from the Department of Education pointed out that No Child Left Behind. When I was coming here, I saw a report on the newspapers that said every state failed that particular test. But in any case, in my opinion, and this is the important thing, I think that we're suffering from national apathy. A national apathy with regards to education in general, at all levels. I get very frustrated when I speak to in kindergarten and second grade at the university level, and I don't see, the issues are always the same, and we get very apt to it in the place, but there is, I sense, this is my personal opinion, a national apathy, and we're living in an era which, in my opinion, education has dropped to the bottom of the national priorities. And I can say that looking at the budget. And this is where my numbers don't add up, because we can't discuss these issues until our tongues go blue, but where is the money going to come from? And I don't see that money coming from. It is not there, and there's where I see that deficit. And unless we get enthusiastically about it, and unless we start rocking the boat frequently and hard, it ain't going to happen, like they say in Texas.
Actually, I think Tony was saying about the importance of parents and the industry and the community backing.
The answer that I would give you is that we have separated the educational content, K-12 educational content, from the real world for too long. And that really what we need to do is to make it a part of the life experience, that there is a goal. I have 5 children of my own. My mother's maiden name is Núñez, by the way.
I have a cousin.
All of my children are apathetic about school. All of them. Not one of them is excited about school, okay? And it's because they don't see any endpoint or any relevancy to what they're learning in the classroom to real life. But I'll tell you one thing, they can sit down at that computer all night and communicate with 16 people at one time. You know, using IT skills that should be put to use elsewhere as far as I'm concerned. But the point is that, you know, that's why we need involvement from other sectors of society in education. And the point about the teachers in the classroom in math and science is we know that 70% of the math and science teachers in this country do not have a master's or a minor degree in math or science. That's a huge problem we're trying to address.
One more question, and I'm going to let Lenore ask that question, and then we are going to break, and we can continue with the discussion. Lenore.
Thanks, Kathy. Actually, I'm going to make another comment about education. So I'm Lenore Blum from the Computer Science Department at Carnegie Mellon, and I'd actually like to talk about computer science education because I think that's quite fundamental. I think our community, the computer science community, has been at fault a lot with what's going on right now in terms of the decline of interest. In the 90s, when there was the dot-com boom and lots of interest, we were actually having barriers at our doors to keep students out of our classrooms. We had so many students interested. So we didn't really have to pay attention to the K-12 pipeline or how computer science was taught. Now, if you look at how computer science is taught in the high schools and the way the public views computer science is often identified just with programming. Now, computer science is infinitely more, programming is an aspect of computer science, but computer science is computational thinking. It's so many different things. And if you go into a high school curriculum and you go to the most advanced courses and you look at AP like biology or chemistry or physics, you're going to get pretty advanced material in these fields and exciting material, very cutting-edge material. If you go into an AP computer science course called AP Computer Science, what you get is programming, and you don't even get programming. You get the details of the programming language du jour. Now, I took a sample APCS test, and I distributed to our faculty in computer science at Carnegie Mellon. And I must tell you, nobody was able to get past the first page. And even my dean took out his book on Java programming and pointed out, well, there's a little controversy here. The point being is that's not computer science, and we're turning off, again, whoever the best and the brightest might be, people who, you know, really want to get involved in the field. If they don't want to see themselves futures as sitting behind a computer desk. We're not teaching computational thinking. We're not teaching the breadth of IT and computer science in our courses, the depth and the ideas. So we've got to pay much more attention to the K-12 education, our field. We have to, as professionals, we have to pay much more attention to our entry-level courses because, after all, APCS is really reflecting our first-level courses. So I think that there's a big challenge for our community is really paying attention to the education. We've got to do that right now because nothing's going to change unless we do that. So, thank you.
Well, with that, we're going to conclude the panel. I want to thank Kathy and the other panelists for a good session. We're now going to take a break, and we'll be back here about 3:30. There should be refreshments right outside the door.